Imagine waking up from a coma, your body completely shattered, barely able to breathe, and knowing you only have one chance to tell the truth, one last opportunity to reveal what really happened that night. This was the reality for Daniel Waterman, a 22-year-old from New York, whose story shocked the United States and raises profound questions about domestic violence, toxic relationships, and the fragility of life. Daniel was an ordinary young man, full of dreams and plans for the future. A natural athlete, passionate about basketball, he was about to become a father to a baby girl. Daniel's enthusiasm was contagious. He spoke every day about his desire to return home, to meet his daughter, to be with the family that loved him so much. But all of that was brutally interrupted on a February night in 2025, during Super Bowl weekend. What appeared to be just another car accident on Interstate 95 in Florida concealed a much darker truth. Daniel was in the passenger seat. His 24-year-old girlfriend, Leigha Mumby, was driving. The car violently crashed into a tree at over 145 kilometers per hour. Daniel was found without a pulse at the scene of the accident. His injuries were so severe that doctors hardly believed he could survive. And for months, while Daniel fought for his life in a hospital bed, everyone thought it had been just a tragic accident. But Daniel knew the truth. And when he finally awoke from that deep coma, too weak to speak, communicating through a whiteboard with investigators by his side, he revealed something that would completely change the course of the investigation. It wasn't an accident, Daniel managed to say. His girlfriend had intentionally caused the accident, and the last words he heard before the impact still echoed in his mind. "I don't care what happens. You'll get what you deserve." This is the story of Daniel Waterman, a young man who fought for his life for 8 months, not just to survive, but to bring the truth to light. A story that reminds us that violence can come from where we least expect it, and that sometimes the most important words are those spoken when there is almost no time left. Daniel passed away on October 8, 2025, but his words from that hospital bed remain. And today, they form the basis of a vehicular homicide charge against the woman who should have been by his side, supporting him, loving him. This is a story about justice, about courage, and about a testimony that came from beyond the coma to ensure that the truth did not die with him. This story is incredible, isn't it? And look, it's only going to get more amazing. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Leave a like too. I guarantee it's worth staying until the end of this video. The revelations that are coming will leave you speechless. Let's continue. It was February 9th, 2025, Super Bowl weekend. Millions of Americans were gathered with friends and family to watch the big game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles. Daniel Waterman, a Chiefs fan, was exchanging excited messages with a friend about the game. It was just a casual conversation about American football, nothing more. But this simple exchange of messages would be the trigger for a tragedy. That morning, Leigha Mumby had discovered she was pregnant. The news should have been cause for celebration. After all, Daniel was extremely excited about the idea of becoming a father, but something about that day was different. The tension in the air was palpable. Daniel and Leigha were traveling along Interstate 95 in Flagler County, Florida. The highway cut through the landscape between Palm Coast Parkway and Matanzas Woods Parkway, a stretch that should have been just another ordinary road, but which would become the scene of one of the most disturbing cases in the state. Inside the 2019 Honda Passport, the atmosphere began to change drastically. Leigha was behind the wheel, Daniel in the passenger seat, and then came the message. That text from her friend in New York about the Super Bowl. That's when everything started to fall apart. The argument started quickly. Swearing was exchanged between the couple. Leigha, visibly upset, questioned Daniel about the message. He tried to explain that it was just a friend, an innocent conversation about the game. But the explosive combination of discovering her pregnancy that morning and the insecurity surrounding the message created a perfect storm of uncontrolled emotions. What Daniel didn't know at that moment was that he was about to experience the most terrifying moments of his life. The car began to accelerate. Leigha was no longer driving normally. She was driving erratically, dangerously. aggressively. Daniel realized that something was very wrong. The speed increased. 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. The car began to make abrupt maneuvers. Daniel, increasingly frightened, tried to make Leigha stop. At some point, she slowed down, and Daniel saw an opportunity. He tried to get out of the vehicle, but before he could do anything, Leigha accelerated again, and then came the words. Those words that Daniel would never forget, that would echo in his mind for the next 8 months, that he would repeat to the investigators when he finally awoke from his coma. Leigha looked at him and said, coldly and determinedly, "I don't care what happens. You'll get what you deserve." The speedometer read over 90 miles per hour, almost 145 kilometers per hour. The Honda Passport sped down the highway at a terrifying speed, and then, deliberately, Leigha turned the steering wheel. The car left the road, veered completely off the highway, and headed straight for a tree. The impact was devastating. The sound of metal twisting, glass shattering, airbags exploding. In that instant, Daniel Waterman's life changed forever. In that instant, a 22-year-old who just wanted to watch the Super Bowl and chat with his friends had his future destroyed. But there was something Leigha hadn't expected. Daniel's iPhone, with its accident detection technology, activated automatically. The device identified the violent impact, immediately called 911, and sent the exact coordinates of the accident site. Help was on the way. When the paramedics arrived at the scene, what they found was absolutely shocking. To fully understand the gravity of what happened that night, we need to delve into the details of what Daniel Waterman revealed to investigators months later, when he was finally able to communicate from his hospital bed. The interview lasted 90 minutes. Daniel was so weak he could barely speak. The investigators had to use an alternative method. They pointed to letters on a board, and Daniel made sounds to indicate which letters formed the words. It was a slow, painful, exhausting process. But Daniel was determined to tell everything. Every detail mattered. He began by explaining the context of that fateful day. The morning had started with Leigha discovering she was pregnant. Daniel was happy with the news. He really wanted to be a father, but something in Leigha's reaction made him uncomfortable. There was a tension he couldn't quite explain. That night, as the Super Bowl approached, Daniel was texting a friend from New York. She was a Philadelphia Eagles fan. He was a Kansas City Chiefs fan. It was that typical friendly banter between fans of rival teams, nothing more than that. But when Leigha saw those messages, something about her changed completely. "Who is she?" Leigha asked, in a tone that Daniel immediately recognized as dangerous. He tried to explain. She was just a friend, just talking about the game. But Leigha didn't want to hear explanations. She was convinced there was more to it. The argument escalated quickly. Daniel told investigators that they exchanged insults, a euphemism for a fight that became increasingly intense. And that's when Leigha, who was driving, started using the car as a weapon. She began driving completely recklessly. Sudden accelerations, sudden braking, aggressive swerves. Daniel begged her to stop, to calm down, to drive normally. But each of his requests seemed to make her even angrier. The car reached terrifying speeds on the highway. Daniel looked at the speedometer and saw the numbers climbing, 80, 85, 90 miles per hour. His heart raced. He knew they were in mortal danger. At some point, Leigha slowed down. Daniel saw this as his chance to escape. He tried to open the door, tried to get out of the vehicle while it was moving more slowly. But Leigha noticed his intentions. She floored the accelerator. The car sped off again, and Daniel was thrown back into his seat. He was trapped. There was no way out. And it was in that moment of pure terror that Leigha uttered those words that would remain etched in Daniel's memory until his last day. She turned to him with an expression that Daniel described as cold and determined and said, "I don't care what happens. You'll get what you deserve." Daniel barely had time to process the full meaning of those words. Immediately after uttering them, Leigha turned the steering wheel sharply. The Honda Passport sped off the highway. Daniel saw the tree approaching. He didn't have time to scream, to protect himself, to do anything. According to Daniel's account to investigators, Leigha deliberately steered the steering wheel toward that tree. It wasn't an accidental swerve. It wasn't losing control of the vehicle. It was an intentional, calculated action, executed with the speed and force necessary to cause maximum damage. The impact was catastrophic. The car crashed into the tree at approximately 95 miles per hour, more than 150 kilometers per hour. The force of the collision was so intense that Daniel was thrown forward even with his seatbelt on. His body suffered trauma that few would survive. But the most disturbing thing of all, and this Daniel made sure to make clear to the investigators, is that he remembers every second of those final moments before the impact. He remembers the expression on Leigha's face. He remembers the sound of the engine revving. He remembers seeing the tree approaching and knowing, with absolute certainty, that his girlfriend had chosen that moment, that place, that tree. Leigha had turned that Honda Passport into a deadly weapon, and Daniel Waterman was the target. In the seconds after the impact, as Daniel's consciousness slowly faded, his iPhone, the very same device that had caused all the argument, became his silent savior. The collision detection technology activated automatically, recognizing the extreme force of the impact. The phone dialed 911 on its own and transmitted the exact GPS coordinates of the accident. Daniel had no pulse when first responders arrived. Leigha was conscious but trapped in the wreckage, incapacitated. Both had to be extricated from the destroyed vehicle. But while Leigha had serious injuries, Daniel's were life-threatening. Or at least that's what everyone thought at the time. When Florida Highway Patrol investigators began examining the wreckage of that 2019 Honda Passport, they had no idea what they were about to uncover. What appeared to be just another tragic accident caused by reckless driving was about to reveal a far more sinister truth. Every modern vehicle has what we call an EDR, Event Data Recorder. It's like an airplane's black box, but for cars. This device records crucial information about what happens in the seconds before, during, and after a collision. And that Honda's EDR had a story to tell. A story that corroborated every word of Daniel Waterman's testimony. The technicians connected their equipment to the wrecked vehicle's onboard computer and began extracting data. What they found was utterly disturbing. Let's start with the speed. In the 3 to 5 seconds before impact, the vehicle was traveling between 93 and 95 miles per hour. To put that into perspective, we're talking about 150 to 153 kilometers per hour. On a highway where the speed limit was significantly lower, that car was flying. But speed was just the beginning. What really caught the researchers' attention was what was not recorded in the data. The brakes were not applied. Read that again. The brakes weren't applied, not even once in the critical moments before the collision. When you're driving and you see an obstacle ahead, be it another car, a sharp turn, or a tree, your natural instinct, your automatic reflex, is to slam on the brakes. It's a basic human reaction. Even if you know you won't be able to stop in time, you try. But Leigha Mumby didn't try. There wasn't a single skid mark. The ABS braking system, which is designed to assist in emergency braking, remained completely inactive. It wasn't activated even once. And there's more. The vehicle's stability control, that system that helps keep the car on the correct trajectory when you make sudden maneuvers, was also not activated. This means there was no attempt at correction, no effort to keep the vehicle on the road. But perhaps the most damning piece of data of all was recorded approximately 4 seconds before the collision. The EDR showed that the vehicle was making aggressive maneuvers. The technical term used by the investigators was exactly that. Aggressive maneuvers. These weren't simple swerves. It wasn't a momentary loss of control. The onboard computer registered deliberate, intentional, aggressive steering wheel movements. And then, after these maneuvers, the vehicle left the highway completely and went directly towards that tree. John Hager, the Waterman family's lawyer, summed it up perfectly when he told reporters, "This was not an accident. The evidence showed that she did not use the brakes. The car was accelerating at the moment of impact. Accelerating, not slowing down, not trying to stop, accelerating." Let me paint the full picture for you of what these technical data tell us. Leigha Mumby was driving at over 150 km/h. She made aggressive steering maneuvers. She steered the vehicle off the road, She aimed for a tree, and in the final moments, when a collision was inevitable, she kept her foot on the accelerator. She didn't try to brake. She didn't try to avoid it. She accelerated. But there was another crucial piece of technological evidence that became fundamental to this case. Daniel Waterman's iPhone. When Apple introduced accident detection functionality in its latest iPhones, many saw it as just another interesting safety feature. But for Daniel Waterman, this technology meant the difference between life and death. At the exact moment of impact, Daniel's iPhone automatically detected the collision through its advanced motion sensors. The device recognized the extreme force of the sudden deceleration, the kind of impact that only happens in serious accidents. And then, without any human intervention required, the phone did three crucial things. First, he activated a countdown with a loud alarm. If Daniel had been conscious and not seriously injured, he could have canceled the alert, but he wasn't conscious. He was dying. Second, the iPhone automatically dialed 911. Daniel didn't need to touch anything. He didn't need a voice command. The phone knew it was an emergency and called for help. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the device transmitted the exact GPS coordinates of the accident to the emergency center. The paramedics knew exactly where to go. There was no time to waste searching for the location on a long highway. When first responders arrived at the scene, guided by those precise coordinates, what they found was a scene of utter destruction. The Honda Passport was completely wrecked, embraced by the tree as if it had been thrown against it with tremendous force, which in fact, it had been. Daniel Waterman had no pulse. A paramedic tried to resuscitate him right there on the side of the road. His body was in positions that shouldn't have been possible. Broken bones pierced through the skin. Blood was everywhere. The emergency responders had seen many accidents, but this one was different. The violence of the impact was shocking. Leigha Mumby was conscious but trapped in the wreckage of the vehicle. She had to be extracted using specialized equipment. She was injured, yes, but nothing compared to what had happened to Daniel. And here's a detail that can't be ignored. The driver's side, where Leigha was sitting, suffered significantly less damage than the passenger side. The tree had struck the vehicle in such a way that Daniel, in the passenger seat, took the brunt of the impact. Coincidence? The technical evidence suggested otherwise. All of this information, the EDR data, the GPS coordinates, the vehicle damage patterns, was carefully documented and filed. But at that point in February, there were still no charges of attempted murder. There was still no word from Daniel about what had actually happened inside that car. Investigators suspected something was wrong. The technical evidence didn't match a typical accident, but they needed something more. They needed the victim's testimony. And Daniel Waterman, against all medical odds, was still alive. Barely, but alive. And he had a story to tell, if he could survive long enough to tell it. When Daniel Waterman was rushed to the hospital, the doctors who received him were shocked by the extent of his injuries. It was unusual to see someone so severely injured still technically alive. One of the surgeons even commented that it looked as if Daniel had fallen from a building or been hit by a train. Michael Gilman, Daniel's grandfather, tried to describe the situation to journalists weeks later, and his words echo the horror of that moment. He broke everything. There wasn't much that wasn't broken. We're going to detail exactly what the medical report revealed. Prepare yourselves, because the list is absolutely devastating. Daniel's cervical spine was fractured, specifically the C6 and C7 vertebrae. For those who don't know, these are the vertebrae in the neck, extremely close to the base of the skull. A fracture in this region can cause complete paralysis or instant death. Daniel was lucky, if we can call it that the fracture didn't completely sever his spinal cord, but the damage was done. His neck was broken. A spinal column. He also suffered fractures in other areas. We're talking about multiple damaged vertebrae along Daniel's back. Every movement, every breath caused unimaginable pain. The collarbone was broken in 3 different places. It wasn't a clean fracture, it was a shattered fracture. The bones fragmented on impact, creating multiple points of rupture that would require complex surgeries to reconstruct. Both of Daniel's hips were dislocated. Imagine the force required to dislocate not one, but both hips simultaneously. His body was thrown so violently into the vehicle that his pelvic joints were ripped from their natural positions. The pain was indescribable. The femur, the strongest bone in the human body, was broken. Have you ever heard that the femur can withstand pressure of up to 1,700 kilograms before breaking? Well, the impact was so severe that even this massive bone couldn't withstand it. A leg and ankle. They also suffered multiple fractures. Daniel wouldn't have been able to stand even if he wanted to. His lower limbs were completely destroyed, but the injuries didn't stop at the skeletal system. Internally, Daniel was dying. He suffered a hematoma epidural, an accumulation of blood between the skull and the membrane that protects the brain. This type of injury is particularly dangerous because the accumulated blood begins to compress the brain, potentially causing irreversible damage or death if not treated immediately. Daniel's lungs were punctured, a condition called pneumothorax. Air escaped into his chest cavity every time he tried to breathe, collapsing his lungs. He also had pulmonary contusion, meaning the lung tissue was bruised and bleeding internally. Every breath was a battle. The zygomatic bone part of the cheek and the temporal region. His skull suffered severe contusions. His face was unrecognizable, swollen and deformed by the trauma. And there was also the fracture oftalus, one of the ankle bones that is notoriously difficult to break and even more difficult to heal properly. When the paramedics arrived, Daniel had no pulse. His heart had stopped. They had to perform CPR right there on the side of the road, trying to bring the young man back to life while carefully extracting him from the wreckage of the destroyed vehicle. And they succeeded. By some medical miracle, they managed to get his heart beating again. But Daniel was in such critical condition that the doctors didn't know if he would survive the next few hours. And even if he did survive, there was no guarantee that he wouldn't be left in a permanent vegetative state due to the brain trauma. The Waterman family was called from New York to Florida. When Daniel's mother, Heather Waterman, saw her son for the first time after the accident, she barely recognized him. His face was so swollen, so bruised, connected to so many tubes and machines, that he looked like a stranger. The doctors were honest with the family. Daniel's chances of surviving were minimal. And even if he did survive, he would probably never walk again, never be the same. The damage to his spine was too severe. The injuries were too extensive. But there was something the doctors didn't know about Daniel Waterman. He was a fighter, an athlete since he was young, used to pushing his body beyond its limits. Daniel had an inner strength that would surprise everyone. In the first few weeks, Daniel remained in an induced coma. Doctors needed to give his body time to begin healing. For the initial surgeries to take effect, they operated on his spine, trying to stabilize the fractured vertebrae. They drained the hematoma in his brain. They inserted chest tubes to allow his lungs to expand again. They placed pins and plates in the broken bones. Surgery after surgery, week after week, Daniel fought. His body fought. Heather Waterman never left her son's side. She spoke to him every day, even knowing he couldn't hear her. She told him about the baby on the way, about how he would be a wonderful father, about all the plans they had made together. She begged him not to give up. And slowly, very slowly, Daniel began to respond. First, there were only small movements, a finger that twitched when asked, an eyelid that blinked. The doctors were surprised, then encouraged. Daniel was fighting to come back, but with this struggle for survival came something more. Daniel carried a knowledge, a truth that needed to be told. He knew what had happened in that car. He knew it hadn't been an accident, and while he lay there, broken and shattered, kept alive by machines and sheer willpower, Daniel had only one persistent thought. He needed to survive long enough to tell the truth. In the following months, while Daniel remained hospitalized, connected to ventilators, undergoing intensive physiotherapy just to be able to move his fingers, Leigha Mumby was at home, recovering from her much less serious injuries, and growing in her belly was Daniel's daughter. The daughter he so longed to meet. Daniel's grandfather, Michael Gilman, visited regularly, and every time he saw his grandson in that state, a strong, athletic young man now reduced to a broken body in a hospital bed, he felt a mixture of sadness and anger. Because even in those early months, When there was still no official testimony, the family already suspected that it hadn't been just an accident. They were right, and in May 2025, 3 months after the accident, Daniel would finally be strong enough to confirm his suspicions. March, April, May of 2025. The months dragged on in the hospital, each day a different battle. Each small victory won with pain and determination. Daniel Waterman was fighting the hardest fight of his life, not just for physical survival, but for the opportunity to seek justice. Heather Waterman, her mother, would later describe those months with simple but powerful words. He never gave up. Throughout all that time, he literally never gave up. The first few weeks were the most critical. Daniel underwent multiple emergency surgeries. Doctors worked to stabilize his spine, inserting metal rods and screws to hold the broken vertebrae in place. They operated on his hips, carefully relocating them into the joints. They reconstructed his femur with titanium plates. Each procedure was risky. Each anesthesia an additional risk for a body already so fragile. Daniel remained in an induced coma for weeks. Doctors didn't want to wake him yet. The pain would be unbearable, and his body needed time to begin the initial healing process. But even in a coma, connected to ventilators and machines that maintained his vital functions, Daniel fought. His heart kept beating. His lungs, even punctured and damaged, kept trying to work. When they finally began to reduce the sedation, everyone held their breath. There was no guarantee that Daniel would wake up. There was no guarantee that, if he did wake up, his brain would still function normally after the severe trauma and epidural hematoma. But Daniel woke up. The first moments were confusing, disorienting. He didn't know where he was. He didn't understand why he couldn't move. The pain was overwhelming. Even with all the medication, the pain coursed through every nerve ending in his body. He tried to scream, but realized there was a tube going down his throat, connected to the ventilator. He couldn't speak. Panic gripped him. His heart rate skyrocketed, causing the monitors to beep frantically. Nurses rushed to calm him down. Heather was there, holding his hand, one of the few parts of his body not immobilized or in a cast, and whispering that he was safe, that he was alive, that everything was going to be all right. But Daniel knew that all was not well, because he remembered. He remembered everything. He remembered the argument in the car. He remembered Leigha driving more and more erratically. He remembered trying to get out of the vehicle. And he remembered with crystal clarity her last words before the impact, "I don't care what happens. You'll get what you deserve." He remembered the tree approaching. He remembered the exact moment when Leigha deliberately turned the steering wheel toward it. But how could he tell this? He could barely move, let alone speak. The tube in his throat prevented him from making any sound other than muffled moans. The days turned into weeks. Slowly, very slowly, Daniel improved enough for the doctors to remove the breathing tube. He could try to breathe on his own. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of his life. Those first moments trying to draw air with damaged lungs, feeling each breath like glass cutting from the inside. But he succeeded. Daniel was breathing on his own. However, there was a problem. The throat trauma caused by prolonged intubation, combined with the injuries from the accident, left Daniel almost unable to speak. He could only make hoarse sounds and inaudible whispers. The words he so desperately needed to say were trapped inside him. But Daniel had something to say, and the Florida Highway Patrol investigators knew it. On May 15, 2025, more than 3 months after the accident, 2 investigators entered Daniel's hospital room. They had questions. Many questions. The technical evidence from the vehicle suggested something was wrong. It didn't seem like a typical accident. But they needed to hear from Daniel what had really happened. Heather Waterman was there. She knew it would be difficult for her son to relive those moments, but she also knew it was necessary. Justice needed to be served. The investigators explained the situation to Daniel. They knew he couldn't speak properly, so they came up with a solution, a chart with all the letters of the alphabet. The method would be slow and exhaustive. An investigator would point to each letter, one by one. When they reached the letter Daniel wanted to use, they would make a sound, any sound they could produce to indicate it, letter by letter. They would form words, word by word. They would form sentences. Sentence by sentence, they would discover the truth. The interview lasted 90 minutes. 90 minutes of intense concentration, of physical pain, of reliving emotional trauma. Daniel was exhausted just from being awake, let alone trying to communicate in this way. But he persisted. He talked about the message from his friend, about discovering the pregnancy, about the argument that started in the car, about Leigha starting to drive dangerously, about his attempt to get out of the vehicle when she slowed down. And then came the hardest part. Daniel needed to recount those final moments. Each letter was an effort, each word, agony. But he couldn't stop. Not now. The researchers meticulously noted down each letter. Daniel frequently needed to stop to rest. The pain was intense. The effort of simply making sounds was exhausting him. But he continued. There it was. Leigha Mumby's words moments before deliberately crashing the car into that tree. Daniel had managed to communicate the truth, but he didn't stop there. Letter by letter, he explained how she turned the steering wheel, how the car went off the road, how she aimed for the tree, how there was no attempt to brake, to swerve, to avoid. It was intentional. Everything was intentional. When the interview finally ended, Daniel was completely exhausted. He had used every ounce of energy he had to tell that story. The investigators thanked him and left the room. They had what they needed. They had the victim's testimony. And now, combined with the technical evidence from the vehicle, they had a case. In July 2025, Leigha Mumby was formally charged, not only with reckless driving, but with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The car being the weapon. The charge of causing grievous bodily harm was also added. When Heather told Daniel about the accusations, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in months. A glimmer of satisfaction. The truth was coming out. Justice was being served. But Daniel's struggle was far from over. He still had months of recovery ahead of him. Painful physiotherapy to try and regain some mobility. More surgeries. More pain. Throughout all this time, there was one thing that kept Daniel fighting. The baby. His daughter. Leigha had given birth while Daniel was still hospitalized. He had a daughter now, and he had never seen her. He wasn't allowed to see her. Leigha didn't allow any contact with the Waterman family. But Daniel had hope. He told his mother every day, "I want to go home. I need to meet my daughter. I need to be with my family." That desire, that goal, kept him alive. It kept him fighting. June passed. July passed. August, September. Daniel was getting stronger. Slowly, he could sit for longer periods. He could move his arms more easily. He was making progress. But then October came. And with October came pneumonia. For someone with lungs already damaged by the accident, pneumonia was a near certain death sentence. Daniel was intubated again. He returned to the ICU. His body, which had fought so bravely for 8 months, was finally reaching its limit. The Waterman family gathered around his bedside. Heather held her son's hand, whispering words of encouragement, begging him not to give up. But she could see on the monitors, in the doctor's eyes, that it was coming to an end. Daniel Waterman passed away on October 8, 2025, 8 months after that fateful day in February. 8 months of tireless struggle. He was only 22 years old, but he had succeeded. He had survived long enough to tell the truth, long enough to ensure that Leigha Mumby faced justice. And now, with his death, everything would change again. The death of Daniel Waterman on October 8, 2025, completely changed the legal landscape of the case. What was previously an accusation of assault and aggravated bodily harm now became something much more serious. Leigha Mumby was no longer just charged with injuring someone. She was charged with taking a life. Let's go back in time a bit to understand the evolution of the accusations against her. July 2025. The first accusations after Daniel was able to give his testimony in May. And with all the technical evidence from the vehicle already analyzed, the Flagler County District Attorney's Office decided it had sufficient grounds to prosecute Leigha Mumby. In July, she was formally charged with 3 serious crimes. First, reckless driving, causing serious bodily injury. This is a serious felony charge in Florida. We're not talking about a simple traffic violation. We're talking about operating a vehicle in such a dangerous and negligent manner that it caused life-threatening injuries to another person. The evidence was clear. 95 miles per hour, no brakes applied, aggressive maneuvers. This was far beyond careless driving. It was reckless driving of the highest degree. Second, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Now you might be thinking, but there wasn't a weapon involved. Technically, there was. Under Florida law, a deadly weapon is defined as any object that is used or threatened to be used in a way that is likely to cause death or great bodily harm. A 2,000-pound car traveling at 150 km/h is undoubtedly a deadly weapon. Leigha Mumby used that Honda Passport as a weapon, deliberately, intentionally, for the purpose of causing harm. This charge is a second-degree felony in Florida, punishable by up to 15 years in prison, and it acknowledges something fundamental. What happened in that car was not an accident. It was an attack. Third, to cause serious bodily injury. This accusation complemented the others, focusing specifically on the consequences of Leigha's actions. Daniel Waterman had suffered spinal fractures, a broken neck, punctured lungs, and a head injury, an endless list of injuries that qualified as serious by any definition of the word. When Leigha was arrested in July, she was taken to the Flagler County Jail. Her bail was set, and she was able to pay it and be released while awaiting trial. She returned home to Flagler Beach to continue her pregnancy and prepare for the birth of Daniel's daughter. And here's something that makes this case even more complex and painful. All this time, while Daniel struggled in a hospital bed, barely able to breathe, undergoing surgery after surgery, Leigha was free. She was living her life, preparing to be a mother, while the father of her baby was agonizing. The Waterman family was furious. How could the person responsible for Daniel's condition be free? But legally, Leigha was entitled to bail. The charges were serious, yes, but Daniel was still alive. It wasn't murder yet. October 11th, 2025. The baby is born, just 3 days after Daniel's death. Leigha Mumby gave birth to a girl, the daughter Daniel so longed to meet. The daughter he talked about every day in the hospital. The daughter who was his motivation to keep fighting. Daniel never met her. He never held his daughter in his arms. He never heard her first cry. He never saw her eyes. All of that was taken from him that February night. The Waterman family learned of the birth through legal sources. Leigha did not inform them. There was no communication between them. And now, with Daniel dead, a new battle was just beginning. The battle for custody of that baby. But before we get to that, we need to talk about what happened with the criminal charges. Late October 2025, the homicide charge. With Daniel's death on October 8th, the Flagler County District Attorney's Office had to reevaluate the case. Daniel had died directly as a result of the injuries he sustained in the accident. The causal link was clear. Without the accident, Daniel would be alive. And the evidence showed that the accident was intentional. At the end of October, the prosecution announced that it was adding a new charge to the case: vehicular homicide. In Florida, vehicular homicide occurs when someone causes the death of another human being through the reckless operation of a motor vehicle that is likely to cause death or serious bodily harm to another person. That is exactly what happened here. This charge is a second-degree felony, also punishable by up to 15 years in prison. But more important than the potential sentence was the legal recognition of what actually happened. Leigha Mumby didn't just injure Daniel Waterman, she killed him. Assistant Prosecutor Melissa Clark, who was leading the case, made it clear in court documents that Daniel's death was the direct and foreseeable consequence of Leigha's actions that February night. He had survived for 8 months, but the injuries were too severe. His body never fully recovered, and when pneumonia set in, his damaged lungs simply couldn't cope. Leigha Mumby was arrested again, this time on charges of vehicular homicide. She was taken back to the Flagler County Jail to be processed, but this time, Bail was set at $150,000. To the Waterman family's frustration, Leigha was able to pay that bail as well. She was released again, now as the mother of a newborn, awaiting trial for homicide. The full charges. So, to be clear, Leigha Mumby currently faces 3 serious criminal charges: vehicular homicide for causing the death of Daniel Waterman through reckless and dangerous driving, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for using the vehicle as a weapon to attack Daniel, reckless driving, causing serious bodily injury, for operating the vehicle in a way that caused devastating injuries. If convicted on all charges, Leigha could face decades in prison. The defense positioning: Leigha Mumby is being represented by Reed Hart, an attorney from Jacksonville. 2. Date: the defense has not made extensive public statements about the case. They have not publicly contested Daniel's testimony or the technical evidence. The defense strategy remains largely a mystery. But one thing is certain: they have an extremely difficult case ahead of them. The evidence is overwhelming. The victim's testimony is clear and detailed. The vehicle data confirms every aspect of Daniel's story. There's no denying that the accident happened. There's no denying the speed, the lack of braking, the aggressive maneuvers. The only possible line of defense would be to argue about Leigha's mental state at that moment, perhaps claiming that she didn't intend to cause harm, that it was a moment of anger that got out of control, that she wasn't thinking clearly. But even that defense faces her own words, as reported by Daniel. "I don't care what happens. You'll get what you deserve." These words demonstrate awareness of what was about to happen. They demonstrate intent. They demonstrate that she knew there would be consequences, and she didn't care. November 2025. Preliminary hearings. On November 19, 2025, Leigha Mumby appeared in court for a preliminary hearing. She arrived with her lawyer, making no comments to the press outside the courthouse. It was a brief hearing. The judge confirmed the charges, reviewed the bail conditions, and set the date for the next phase of the process. January 21st, 2026, it would be the pre-trial hearing. In this pre-trial hearing, both sides would present their arguments on how the case should proceed. The defense could attempt to suppress certain evidence. The prosecution could present additional evidence. It would be the final step before a possible trial. The Waterman family's reaction. John Hager, the lawyer representing the Waterman family in the civil aspect of the case, spoke to the press after the addition of the murder charge. His words were measured but firm. "The family is satisfied with the charges presented. They believe the new charges are appropriate and are relieved to see justice being served. There are no winners in this situation. It's a terrible and horrific situation, but the charges are correct and just." He reiterated what he had said before. This was not an accident. The evidence showed that she did not use the brakes. The car was accelerating at the moment of impact. The family also released a statement through Daniel's obituary, which was published on Syracuse.com. They described his death as a result of a tragic act of violence, not an accident, violence. This word was chosen carefully. The Waterman family wanted it to be clear to everyone. Daniel was the victim of a violent act. He was attacked by the person who supposedly loved him, and this attack took his life. The way ahead. As I write this, the case is still ongoing. Leigha Mumby awaits trial, free on bail, caring for her newborn daughter. The Waterman family awaits justice, grieving the loss of Daniel, fighting for custody of their granddaughter. The pre-trial hearing on January 21st will be crucial. It will determine when and how the trial will proceed, and eventually, a jury will have to decide, were Leigha Mumby's actions that February night intentional? Is she guilty of vehicular homicide? The evidence says yes. Daniel's testimony says yes. The technical data says yes. But in the American judicial system, no matter how obvious the evidence may seem, the final decision rests with the jury. And until that jury delivers its verdict, Leigha Mumby is considered innocent until proven guilty. For the Waterman family, this wait is agonizing. Each passing day is another day without Daniel. Each day is another day that the person responsible for his death is free. But they have faith in the system. They have faith in the evidence. And above all, they have faith that Daniel's voice, that voice he fought so hard to have heard, communicating letter by letter from a hospital bed, will not be ignored. Daniel Waterman may be dead, but his truth lives on. And that truth may be the key to ensuring that justice is served. When Daniel Waterman passed away on October 8, 2025, his family wasn't just facing the unimaginable pain of losing a son, a grandson, a brother. They were facing the brutal reality that Daniel had been taken from them by a deliberate act of violence. And now, they had a mission to ensure his death was not in vain. John Hager, the lawyer hired by the Waterman family to represent them in this case, became the family's public voice during this devastating period. And his words were direct, straightforward, based solely on the concrete evidence they had in hand. This was no accident. In interviews with various media outlets, including Fox News and Fox 35 Orlando, Hager was categorical in a statement that would become the family's mantra. This was not an accident. He wasn't speculating. He wasn't making assumptions. He was presenting what the evidence irrefutably showed. And he detailed exactly why. The evidence showed that she did not use the brakes. The car was accelerating at the moment of impact. This statement is crucial. This wasn't a situation where Leigha tried to brake and couldn't. It wasn't a case of slow reflexes or misjudgment. The car was accelerating as she was increasing her speed as she drove towards that tree. Hager continued, "The vehicle data confirms that there was no attempt to brake. The ABS system was not activated. The stability control remained inactive. And the vehicle was making aggressive maneuvers seconds before the collision. These are not opinions. They are facts recorded by the vehicle's onboard computer. They are objective, unquestionable data. And they paint a clear picture. Leigha Mumby deliberately drove that car into a tree at high speed, with Daniel Waterman in the passenger seat. Satisfaction with the accusations. When the Flagler County District Attorney's Office added the vehicular homicide charge following Daniel's death, the family issued a statement through John Hager. His words reflected not celebration, because how could they celebrate when Daniel was dead, but a sense that justice was finally being served. The family is satisfied with the charges presented. They believe the new charges are appropriate and are relieved to see justice being served. But Hager made a point of adding a sober reflection on the whole situation. There are no real winners in this situation. It's a terrible, horrible situation, but the fact that these charges were filed, I think they were correct and fair. And the family is pleased with how diligently the Flagler County District Attorney's Office has worked and is satisfied with the current charges being filed. The family recognized that nothing, absolutely nothing, would bring Daniel back. No conviction, no prison sentence, no judgment could undo what happened that February night, but the charges represented something fundamental. Official recognition that Daniel was the victim of a crime, that his death was not accidental, that someone needs to answer for taking his life. The diligent work of the prosecutor's office, the Waterman family made a point of publicly acknowledging the work of the Flagler County District Attorney's Office and the Florida Highway Patrol. These institutions took the case seriously from the beginning. They did not accept the superficial narrative that it was just a car accident. When the technical data began to show inconsistencies with a typical accident, they investigated further. When Daniel was able to give his testimony in May, they listened attentively, documenting every word painstakingly communicated through that whiteboard. And when Daniel died, they didn't hesitate to escalate the charges to reflect the true gravity of what had happened. For a grieving family, feeling that the authorities are on their side, that they are taking the case seriously, that they are seeking justice with the same determination, that means everything. A tragic act of violence. Daniel Waterman's obituary, published on Syracuse.com, was written from the heart by his family, and in it, one phrase stands out, carefully chosen to convey exactly what happened. Daniel left this world on October 8th far too soon, after a tragic act of violence. Not an accident, not a fatality, not bad luck. Violence. The obituary continued. Daniel passed away after bravely battling injuries sustained in an accident for 8 months. Daniel was excited, about to become a father to a baby girl. He wanted nothing more than to return home to her and the family who loved him so deeply. These words capture the tragedy in its essence. A young man, a father-to-be, full of life and plans, was deprived of it all, and not by a whim of fate, but by the deliberate actions of another person. The obituary also highlighted who Daniel was as a person. A natural athlete, Daniel especially loved basketball and could often be found on the court, where his passion and determination shone through. His strength, resolve, and contagious energy left a lasting impression on everyone who knew him. These are not just pretty words in an obituary. They paint a picture of who was lost, not just a victim, not just a name in a court case, but a real human being with dreams, passions, and people who loved him. Heather Waterman, a mother's voice. Heather Waterman, Daniel's mother, gave several interviews to local media outlets, including Syracuse.com and CNY Central. And her words carry the weight of a pain that no mother should have to endure. She spoke about the months Daniel spent in the hospital. He never gave up. Throughout all that time, he literally never gave up. Heather was there every day. She watched her son struggle with unimaginable pain. She saw him undergo surgery after surgery. She saw him wake from a coma and, despite everything, find the strength to tell the truth about what happened. He was so excited to be a father to a baby girl, Heather shared with reporters. All he wanted was to go home with her and the family who loved him so much. Not a day went by that he didn't express his desire to come home. These words reveal the cruel irony of the case. Daniel fought for 8 months, not only to survive, but to be able to meet his daughter. He had a clear goal: to return home, hold his baby in his arms, be the father he so desperately wanted to be. But that dream was denied him. His daughter was born 3 days after his death. Daniel never met her. He never held her. He never saw her eyes or heard her cry. Heather also cleared up some misunderstandings about that night. When the first report surfaced about the message from another woman that supposedly started the argument, some people tried to blame Daniel, suggesting that perhaps he was having an affair or being inappropriate. Heather made it clear. The message was from a friend who was a Philadelphia Eagles fan. It was about the Super Bowl. My son was a Chiefs fan. They were just joking around with each other about the game. There was no affair. There was no infidelity. It was literally an innocent conversation about American football. And that triggered a reaction that cost Daniel his life. Michael Gilman, a grandfather's fury. Michael Gilman, Daniel's grandfather, also gave interviews, and his words carry not only grief, but justified anger. When he described Daniel's injuries, his voice trembled. He broke everything. He broke his neck. He broke his back. He broke his collarbone in 3 places. He dislocated both hips, broke his leg, and broke his ankle. There wasn't much that wasn't broken. He was all bruised. Michael had watched his grandson grow up, become a man, prepare to be a father, and then he saw that same grandson reduced to a broken body in a hospital bed, struggling just to breathe. But Michael's concern wasn't just with the past, it was also with the future, specifically with the baby. "We can't let the baby grow up with a mother who could do this," he told CNY Central reporters. "I think she put not only Daniel's life in danger, but her own life in danger, and the life of the baby. She was pregnant." This is a crucial point that Michael raised. When Leigha deliberately crashed that car into a tree at 150 km/h, she wasn't just risking Daniel's life. She was risking her own life as well. And she was pregnant. She was risking the life of the child she was carrying. What kind of mother puts her unborn child in danger like that? What kind of person is willing to potentially kill not only their partner, but also their own baby in a moment of rage? These are the questions that haunt the Waterman family, and they are the reasons why they are determined to ensure that that baby, Daniel's daughter, does not grow up under the sole care of Leigha Mumby. The fight for justice continues. The Waterman family has made it clear that they will not rest until full justice is served. This means 2 things to them. First, they want to see Leigha Mumby convicted for the crime she committed. They want her to be held legally accountable for taking Daniel's life. They want her to face the consequences of her actions that February night. Secondly, And perhaps even more importantly for them, they want custody of Daniel's granddaughter. They want to ensure that this child is raised in a safe, loving environment, away from the person who killed her father. John Hager perfectly summed up the family's feelings. Daniel fought for 8 months. He survived long enough to tell the truth. He did his part. Now it's up to the justice system to do theirs. And the family has faith that this will happen. They have faith in the evidence. They have faith in Daniel's testimony. They have faith that in the end, the truth will prevail. Because the truth is simple. Daniel Waterman was murdered, and his killer needs to answer for it. At the heart of this tragedy is an innocent child. A baby girl born on October 11, 2025. Just 3 days after her father's death. A baby who will never know Daniel Waterman, never hear his voice, never feel his arms around her. And now, this child is at the center of a legal battle that could determine her entire future. Daniel's dream. During the 8 months Daniel spent in the hospital fighting for his life, there was one thing that kept him motivated above all else: the baby. His daughter, the thought of meeting her, holding her, being the father he so desperately wanted to be. Every single day, without exception, Daniel expressed the same wish to his mother. Heather, I want to go home. I need to meet my daughter. I need to be with my family. The GoFundMe campaign created to help with Daniel's medical expenses perfectly captured his feelings. Daniel was extremely excited to be the father of a baby girl. He wanted nothing more than to return home with her and the family who loved him so deeply. Not a day went by that he didn't express his desire to go home. Daniel knew he was going to be a father. Even confined to that hospital bed, even with his body broken, even barely able to breathe, he had a purpose, a goal. He was going to meet his daughter. He was going to be a present, loving, dedicated father. But fate, or more precisely, Leigha Mumby's actions that February night, ensured that this would never happen. The birth. On October 11th, 2025, Leigha Mumby gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The baby's name has not been publicly released, likely to protect her privacy and safety. The Waterman family learned of the birth not through Leigha, who had no contact with them, but through her lawyers and court documents. They didn't even know if the baby was okay, if the delivery had been smooth, or if there had been any complications. For Heather Waterman, the moment must have been bittersweet. Her granddaughter had been born, the daughter Daniel so longed to meet. But Daniel was dead, and that baby was with the person the family believed to be responsible for his death. Imagine the anguish. Imagine knowing there's a child, your granddaughter, your son's daughter, just a few miles away, and you can't see her, you can't hold her, you can't even know how she is. Legal complexity. This is where the situation becomes extremely complicated from a legal standpoint. Let's analyze the different aspects. First, the question of paternity. Although Daniel was Leigha's boyfriend and everyone knows he is the child's biological father, legally this needs to be formally established, especially now that Daniel is dead. Normally, when a child is born to unmarried parents, the father needs to sign an acknowledgement of paternity, or paternity needs to be established through DNA testing. Daniel never had that opportunity. He died before the baby was born. So, in order for the Waterman family to have any legal rights over the child, they first need to prove that Daniel is the biological father. This means a post-mortem paternity test using Daniel's DNA, which can be obtained through preserved samples from the hospital, and comparing it to the baby's DNA. But there's a problem. Leigha needs to agree to the test. And why would she agree? Cooperating with the Waterman family isn't in her best interests, especially considering she's facing criminal charges based on Daniel's testimony. Second, maternal rights. In Florida and in most American states, the mother has automatic and primary parental rights over the child, especially when there is no living father. Even if Leigha is facing serious criminal charges, even if she is eventually convicted, she still retains her maternal rights until a court specifically removes them. And removing a mother's parental rights is extraordinarily difficult. Courts generally only do so in cases of proven abuse, severe neglect, or abandonment. Being under criminal charge, even a murder charge, is not automatically sufficient to remove parental rights. So Leigha technically has every legal right to keep the baby with her while awaiting trial. And even if she is convicted, depending on the sentence, she may retain some level of parental rights. Third, grandparents' rights. The Waterman family is seeking what are known as grandparental visitation rights, or ideally full custody. But in Florida, grandparental rights are limited. Florida has a law that allows grandparents to request visitation or custody under specific circumstances, including when one of the parents is dead. The relationship between the child and the grandparents was established. The visit is in the child's best interest. The problem here is that the baby has just been born. There is no established relationship because the Waterman family has never had the chance to meet her, and proving that visitation or custody is in the child's best interest when there is a living and capable biological mother is extremely difficult. In November 2025, Heather Waterman, through her lawyers, formally filed a petition with the court seeking grandparental rights over the child. The petition, according to court records reported by Flagler Live, included the following points: confirmation that Leigha Mumby gave birth on October 11, 2025. Request for a paternity test to establish that Daniel Waterman is the biological father. Request for visitation rights for the Waterman family. A possible request for shared or full custody may be made depending on the outcome of the criminal case. The petition also highlighted a crucial fact. There has been no contact between the Waterman family and Leigha Mumby since Daniel's death. Leigha did not inform the family about the birth. She did not send photos. She did not allow visitation, nothing. For the family, this is especially painful. Daniel fought for 8 months, in part, to be able to meet his daughter. And now she is alive, she is healthy. But the family cannot even see her. Michael Gilman's perspective. Daniel's grandfather, Michael Gilman, was very frank about his concerns in interviews with CNY Central. "We can't let the baby grow up with a mother who could do that." He continued, articulating the family's fear. "I think she put not only Daniel's life in danger, but her own life in danger and the life of the baby. She was pregnant." This is the family's central argument. If Leigha Mumby was willing to deliberately crash a car into a tree at 150 km/h while pregnant, what guarantees are there that she won't endanger the child again in the future? She demonstrated, in the family's words, a lack of regard for life, not only for Daniel's life, but for her own life and the life of the unborn child she was carrying. Is it safe for this child to be under the sole care of someone who has shown so little regard for human life? The distance barrier. There's another complication in this situation. The Waterman family is from New York. Specifically, they're from the Syracuse area in upstate New York. Leigha Mumby lives in Flagler Beach, Florida. This means that any visitation or shared custody agreement would have to take into account more than 1,600 kilometers of distance. Heather Waterman has publicly stated that her ultimate goal is to bring the baby to New York, to grow up close to Daniel's family, close to her roots. But convincing a Florida court to grant custody to grandparents who live in another state, removing the child from the biological mother, is an extremely steep battle. The child's best interest. Ultimately, every custody case boils down to one question: what is in the best interest of the child? The Waterman family would argue, the child deserves to know their father's family. Children deserve to grow up knowing who Daniel was. The child deserves to be in a safe environment, away from anyone who has demonstrated violent and reckless behavior. The child has the right to be raised by people who are not facing criminal charges of homicide. Leigha Mumby, or her lawyers, would argue she is the biological mother and has primary parental rights. She is taking good care of the baby. The baby needs her mother, especially during the crucial first years of life. She has not yet been convicted of any crime. Presumption of innocence. There is no evidence that it poses a danger to the child. The harsh reality. The difficult truth facing the Waterman family is this: even if Leigha Mumby is eventually convicted of Daniel's murder, that doesn't automatically guarantee they will obtain custody of the baby. If she is convicted and imprisoned, the child will certainly need to be placed somewhere. And in that scenario, the Waterman family would be the most obvious candidates. But if Leigha receives a lighter sentence, probation, or even if she is acquitted, unlikely given the evidence, but possible, she would retain her parental rights. And here's the most frustrating part for the family. The legal system moves slowly. Leia's criminal trial could take months, maybe even more than a year. During all that time, she retains full custody of the baby. During all that time, the child is growing, going through developmental milestones. First smiles, first words, first steps. And Daniel's family is missing out on all of it. Heather's goal. Heather Waterman was clear about her intentions in interviews. We're going to prove that Daniel is the father. And then we're going to fight to bring our granddaughter home to New York, where she belongs. For Heather, it's not just about visitation. It's not just about being able to see the child occasionally. She wants full custody. She wants to raise this girl the way Daniel would have wanted. She wants her granddaughter to know the Waterman family, grow up hearing stories about her father, and understand the legacy of love that Daniel left behind. But she also acknowledges the reality. We know it will be a difficult battle, but Daniel fought for 8 months, and we will fight for as long as it takes. This is his daughter. She is all we have left of him, an innocent child at the center. It's important to remember, amidst all these legal battles and intense emotions, that there is a completely innocent child at the center of it all. She didn't ask for any of this. She didn't choose to be born into tragedy. She didn't choose to have a father who died before he met her and a mother accused of killing him. This baby deserves love, stability, and security. She deserves a chance to live a normal life, to grow up in a healthy environment, and not to be defined by the tragedy that marked her birth. The question the court will eventually have to answer is, where does this child have the best chance of having all of this? With her biological mother in Flagler Beach? With her paternal family in New York? In some shared custody arrangement? There are no easy answers. There are no perfect solutions. Because in the end, no matter what happens, this girl will grow up without her father. And that is a loss that no court decision can compensate for. The uncertain future. As I write this, the custody battle is still in its early stages. The paternity test has not yet been publicly conducted, or at least its results have not been released. The custody hearing has not yet taken place. Leia's criminal trial is still months away, and all the while this baby is growing up, day by day, knowing nothing about the legal storm surrounding her, knowing nothing about the father who died desperately wanting to meet her, knowing nothing about the family fighting for her on the other side of the country. Daniel Waterman couldn't fulfill his greatest dream, to be a father to his daughter. But the Waterman family is determined to ensure that somehow Daniel's love for that girl is honored, that she grows up knowing she had a father who loved her, even if he never had the chance to show it. And perhaps, just perhaps, if justice is served, this child will have the opportunity to grow up surrounded by the family Daniel loved so much. The family he mentioned every day in that hospital bed, the family he desperately wanted to return to. When we think of domestic violence, we usually imagine obvious physical assaults, punches, kicks, strangulation. But the Daniel Waterman case shows us a form of violence that is less discussed, but equally deadly: the use of vehicles as weapons. According to data from the Free National Domestic Violence Hotline, approximately 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men in the United States experience severe physical violence by an intimate partner during their lives. But how many of these cases involve the use of cars as instruments of violence? The truth is that vehicles are rarely recognized as tools of domestic abuse, even when the signs are there: aggressive driving during arguments, threats of causing accidents, using the car to intimidate or control. These are all warning signs that are often ignored or minimized. In Daniel's case, the signs were there. Leigha began driving recklessly during the argument. She was using the car to express her anger, to scare Daniel, to exert control over the situation. And when Daniel tried to get out of the vehicle, tried to remove himself from the dangerous situation, she accelerated again, trapping him. This is a classic pattern of abusive behavior, preventing the victim from escaping. But because it was happening in a moving car, rather than in a locked house, it's easy to not recognize it for what it really was: signs of toxic relationships. Looking back, there are questions we need to ask. Were there other signs that this relationship was toxic or abusive? Had Daniel expressed concerns to friends or family before that fateful day? Unfortunately, we don't have much publicly available information about the dynamics of the relationship before the accident, but what we do know is revealing. Leigha's reaction to a simple text message about American football was completely disproportionate. Extreme jealousy, especially over innocent interactions, is often a warning sign of abusive or controlling relationships. The discovery of the pregnancy that morning also appears to have been a trigger. Pregnancy is, statistically, one of the most dangerous times for victims of domestic violence. According to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, domestic violence can begin or escalate during pregnancy. And Leigha's response when Daniel tried to get out of the car, "You'll get what you deserve." This is the language of punishment, of retribution. She felt that Daniel deserved to be punished, and she would be the one to carry out that punishment. The importance of victim testimony. One of the most extraordinary things about this case is Daniel's own testimony. Think of the titanic effort he made. 3 months after an accident that destroyed his body, barely able to make sounds, let alone speak, he spent 90 minutes communicating, letter by letter, what had happened. Why? Because he knew his word was crucial. He knew that without his testimony, this would be treated as just another car accident. Leigha could claim he lost control of the vehicle, that it was an error in judgment, that he had no intention of causing harm. But Daniel was there. Daniel heard her words. Daniel saw the expression on her face. Daniel felt the moment she deliberately turned that steering wheel. This case reminds us of the critical importance of believing victims and giving them a voice. If investigators hadn't taken Daniel's testimony seriously, if they had dismissed it as confusion caused by brain trauma, justice would never have been sought. The crucial role of technology. There are 2 technological aspects of this case that literally made the difference between life and death, and between justice and impunity. First, iPhone accident detection. When Daniel's iPhone automatically detected the collision and called 911, transmitting precise GPS coordinates, it saved Daniel's life, at least temporarily. Without that quick response, Daniel would have died right there on the side of the road. He would never have woken up from the coma. He would never have given his testimony. This technology, introduced by Apple and other smartphone manufacturers in recent years, has saved hundreds of lives. And in Daniel's case, it also helped ensure that the truth came to light. Second, the event. Data recorder, EDR. The vehicle's onboard computer data was absolutely crucial to this case. It confirmed every aspect of Daniel's testimony. Extreme speed, lack of braking, aggressive maneuvers, the fact that the car was accelerating at the moment of impact. Without this objective data, it would be Daniel's word against Leigha's. But the data doesn't lie. It paints a clear and irrefutable picture of what happened in that car. This case demonstrates how modern technology can serve as a silent witness, documenting the truth in ways that were previously impossible. Anger, control, and irreversible consequences. Let's talk about what really happened in that car on a psychological level. Leigha Mumby was pregnant, hormonal, possibly scared about the future. She found out about the pregnancy that morning, news that can be overwhelming. And then she saw a message that, in her mind, confirmed her worst fears, that Daniel was interested in someone else, that she would be abandoned, that she would raise this baby alone. None of this justifies what she did, but it helps us understand how someone can reach such an intense point of anger that they commit an act of extreme violence. The problem is that anger, no matter how intense, can't be an excuse for violence. We all feel anger sometimes. We all go through moments of jealousy, insecurity, fear, but the vast majority of people don't transform these feelings into actions that put lives at risk. There is a moment of choice, a moment where you decide, will I express my anger in a healthy way, or will I let it control me? Will I walk away from the situation, or will I escalate it? Leigha made choices that night. She chose to drive aggressively. She chose to accelerate when Daniel tried to leave. She chose to utter those threatening words. She chose to turn the steering wheel toward that tree. She chose to keep her foot on the accelerator instead of braking. These were not reflexive reactions. They were decisions, one after another, that led to irreversible consequences. And this is the crucial point. There is no undo button for violence. Daniel isn't coming back. That baby will never know her father. The Waterman family has lost a son, a grandson, a loved one. Leigha destroyed not only Daniel's life, but her own life and her daughter's future. All this because of what? Because of a message about American football. Because of unfounded jealousy. Because of an inability to control anger. The consequences last forever. The anger lasts only a few moments. Warning signs and how to ask for help. If you are in a relationship and recognize any of these signs, please seek help. Your partner has extreme or irrational jealousy. He/she tries to control where you go, who you talk to, what you wear. He/she has outbursts of anger disproportionate to minor situations. Do you feel scared when you are near him, her? He/she uses intimidation, physical or emotional, to control you. He/she drives dangerously when angry, especially when you are in the car. Do you feel like you need to walk on eggshells so as not to provoke him or her? He/she prevents you from leaving situations or from distancing yourself when there is conflict. These are warning signs of a potentially abusive relationship. And abusive relationships can escalate to violence, sometimes lethal violence. Available resources: National Domestic Violence Hotline, USA, 1-800-799-7233, available 24/7. Online, thehotline.org. By SMS, send START to 88788. For those in Brazil, Women's Helpline, 180 Military Police, 190. Women's Ombudsman, 32-104-8400, São Paulo. These hotlines are confidential and can help you create a safety plan, find shelter if needed, and connect you with local resources. The responsibility of friends and family. If you know someone who may be in an abusive relationship, you also have a role to play. Don't judge. Leaving an abusive relationship is extremely difficult for multiple complex reasons. Listen without pressuring. Let the person know you're there when they need you. Help her identify the warning signs, but let her make her own decisions. Have a plan. If the person decides to leave, be ready to help, whether that's offering a place to stay, help with transportation, or just emotional support. Never confront the abuser directly. This could put the victim in greater danger. The difficult question. There's a question this case raises, and it's uncomfortable to consider. Could this have been avoided if Daniel had recognized the warning signs sooner? Would he have ended the relationship? If friends or family had expressed concerns about Leigha, would Daniel have listened? If there had been a previous argument that had been equally intense, should Daniel have seen that as a sign to leave? The truth is, we'll never know, and it's important not to blame the victim. Daniel didn't cause this. He didn't deserve this. No text message, no argument, no action on his part justifies what Leigha did. But there are lessons here for all of us. Pay attention to the warning signs. Take disproportionate anger seriously. If someone shows a lack of control over their emotions, especially in potentially dangerous situations like driving, that's a serious problem. If you're in a relationship where you feel controlled, scared, or in danger, even if it's only sometimes, even if your partner is nice most of the time, please consider seeking help, because Daniel Waterman probably thought it was just an argument, just another fight they would get over. He probably never imagined that night would end with him in a hospital, fighting for his life. If there is anything positive that can emerge from this tragedy, it is awareness. Daniel Waterman's story is being told across the country. It's making people think about domestic violence in new ways. It's highlighting how vehicles can be used as weapons. It's reminding us all that we need to take warning signs seriously. And it's showing the importance of courage. The courage that Daniel demonstrated by fighting for 8 months, by insisting on telling the truth even when it required superhuman effort. Daniel couldn't save his own life, but his story can save other lives. If someone reading about this case recognizes warning signs in their own relationship and seeks help, if a life is saved because someone learned from Daniel's tragedy, then perhaps his death wasn't entirely in vain. This is the legacy the Waterman family wants for Daniel. Not just justice in court, but also awareness, prevention, lives saved. And we can all honor this legacy by being vigilant, showing solidarity, and never ignoring the signs that someone may be in danger.